No, am I being charged with something? I didn't do nothing. I didn't kill anybody.
The police believe this woman could be involved in the death of 62-year-old Valena Shepard, one of the most gruesome murders they'd ever witnessed.
She was strangled, she was stabbed, and she was bludgeoned. This was as a brutal crime that I've seen.
But what they didn't know was that in reality, she was being framed by her own boyfriend. He would have gotten away with it too, but he made a crucial mistake. He didn't realize he was being filmed.
Address emergency. 1 Lincoln Square, apartment 10G. Okay, what's going on over there? My mom has passed away. Her neck was broke. It was a fall. She must have been trying to go to the store, so. All right, we'll send someone over, okay?
It all began when this jarring 911 call came through in Albany at 11:30 on the night of January 5th, 2020. Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived at the scene. When officers entered the house, they found the victim, 62-year-old Valena Shepard, on the ground inside the apartment, deceased. Present at the scene was the caller, her son, who had found the body.
That's her son. You're her son? Sorry.
In addition to James, her home healthcare provider, Quenisha Anderson, was also present, along with her boyfriend, Lee Williams, who also had information for the police.
She wasn't answering her phone.
What time did you call?
All day, periodically.
What time?
8 times today. The last time about 9 o'clock at night.
From what James had told them and Quenisha's statement, it seemed likely to the police that Valena had been dead for a few hours. However, when they examined the body, a couple of things stood out to them.
Did she seem like she's been here for a little while at least?
There's no doubt, but I mean, it could have been, 2 hours, could be 6 hours. I don't, we can't gauge that.
Valena Shepard, as she laid on the floor, appeared to be dressed as if she was going to go out. She was wearing a large winter coat. She was dressed in pants and sneakers. It was my belief that she had been deceased for quite a few hours.
The fact that there were no signs of forced entry made the police pretty certain there had been no outside perpetrator. James had also stated that he thought she'd fallen even during his initial call, and this seemed likely at the time.
I observed a laceration on her chin, and in speaking to James and other responding officers, people made the notion that Valena Shepard may have fell into the corner of that wall and caused that laceration.
But as the police began to comb through the crime scene, they noticed little pieces of evidence, and their suspicions grew.
And I just don't like what's there. I don't want to touch anything until we get some pictures. Right. But we don't know if that's her shit either. I don't know if that's hers.
We discovered what appeared to me to be a bloody boot print. I thought there was definitely more to it than just a fall into the wall.
The bloody footprint confirmed their suspicions that something else was afoot, but the condition of the body made it hard for them to determine what the exact cause of death could be. So the body was collected and sent for an autopsy to be sure of what exactly occurred. In the meantime, officers began to scour the house for any more evidence they could collect. They began to notice a disturbing trend.
What does her pocketbook look like?
It's red.
Red, okay. Is it like big, small?
Ain't that big.
Okay, so like a regular size. Do you know where she keeps that in her apartment?
No, that pocketbook goes everywhere
With her, okay. She's got a red pocketbook. Should be wherever she is.
There was an Echo Dot box that Valena Shepard had within her apartment, as well as laptop boxes.
But we were unable to locate the electronics inside of Valena Shepard's apartment.
In addition to her pocketbook and the electronics that were missing, her phone was also nowhere to be found. The police were now sure that this was not a natural death. It seemed more and more likely that some sort of sinister robbery had occurred. They decided to close off and preserve the crime scene until the results of the autopsy returned and they could be sure of what had led to her demise. Before even beginning the autopsy, the medical examiners noticed something that they believed could provide them with critical data: a life vest. Velena wore this device, which acted as a defibrillator if her heart ever stopped. The medical examiners were hopeful its data could provide them with the exact time of death. But these hopes were soon dashed.
And he had told us that it cannot run without certain wiring and a battery pack. And that battery pack and a lot of the wiring was missing from Miss Shepard.
We were unable to locate it, so we figured that the person who murdered the victim must have taken it during the murder and discarded it.
The data couldn't be recovered. They'd need to recover the information from the manufacturer's servers. But even with their warrant, the process would take time. However, soon they noticed something else, which further heightened suspicions.
Discovered on Miss Shepard's person, tucked within her undergarments, was a large sum of money. There was $1,100 in $100 denominations.
This large sum of money hidden on her person made the detectives wonder whether Velena had known she was going to be robbed. But they'd no way of proving this just yet. Then, just as they were unsure what next steps to take, the results of the autopsy came back, and it chilled them to the bone.
The medical examiner determined that Velena Shepard had been deceased for more than one day, and she had passed some point on January 4th. She was strangled, she was stabbed, and she was bludgeoned to the point where numerous ribs were broken. Skull fractures had occurred. This was as a brutal crime that I've seen.
There were no doubts now. This had been a brutal homicide, and the missing items pointed to the fact that robbery had been the motive. But with no signs of forced entry and the apartment itself not having been ransacked, it likely meant the killer was someone familiar to Velena, who also knew where she kept her valuables. With this in mind, they turned to the person who made the call and had been present at the crime scene when they arrived, her own son, James Shepard.
James was the 911 caller, so he was one of the first people we wanted to interview and ask about his whereabouts on the day his mother was murdered.
As they took him to the station, his aunt, Jamie Shepard Leach, was immediately concerned.
They take my nephew to one room, then I'm thinking, oh, this don't look good. And they sits me in another room. They was questioning my nephew to find out if he had anything to do with it or not.
The police began by questioning James about where he'd been on January 4th, 2020, the day his mother was murdered. He informed them that he'd been working that whole day at the hospital. James said that he missed a number of texts from his mother's healthcare worker, Quenisha, during that time. After hearing this, the detective made a calculated decision to see how James would react.
And it was at that point in time that I told James that this death was ruled a homicide and that his mother had been brutally murdered.
The police hoped that if he had been involved, his reaction would give him away. But James's reaction it should have left them with no further doubts.
He was obviously very upset. Visibly, he began to cry. He was almost sunk in that somebody would do that to his mother.
But the detectives knew that suspects can often fake their emotions, so they asked James if he'd be willing to let them check his phone to see if there's anything suspicious on there. But his response was unexpected.
He was cooperative, showing us messages. None of them appeared to be deleted or altered in any way. So based on our conversation with him, we left confident that he wasn't the one who did this.
James's cooperation and willingness to share personal details helped them to clear him as a suspect. But if he hadn't been the known individual who'd robbed and murdered Velena, who could it be? Next, the officers decided it was time to speak to Velena's healthcare worker, someone who would have had all the access necessary to commit this crime. Quenisha Anderson was brought in for questioning. She'd been there that night, and detectives needed to understand exactly what happened. They wanted to hear things from her, what she saw, what she remembered, and if there's anything she wasn't saying.
So, am I being charged with something? I didn't do nothing. I didn't kill anybody. Just let me go.
Did you talk to Miss Melina on Saturday?
I was talking to Miss Molina.
Like early in the morning or
It was early in the morning, like 7:30.
In her interview, Quenisha told detectives that she and Lee Williams had recently met through a dating app and that he'd been staying with her at her apartment. That night, when Velena was brought downstairs to Quenisha's place, Quenisha noticed that she had a lot of cash in her purse, around $1,600. She said they both agreed she'd take Velena to the bank the next day and deposit it. But during the autopsy, the medical examiner only found $1,100 hidden in Velena's undergarments. That meant $500 were unaccounted for. At that point, detectives started thinking, could money have been the motive? Was financial desperation driving someone's actions?
No,
I got my own money. I make $14 an hour. I work over 40 hours every week. My direct deposit on Friday was over $600. I got $200 in my bank account. I would never do that to somebody, especially somebody who's disabled. This thought she was in her apartment.
That's nothing. So
that doesn't do it justice.
To the injuries she sustained.
I would never want Miss Velena to go through that.
Well, she did.
In the interview, Quenisha got emotional. She said she had enough money on her own and insisted she could never do something like that, especially to someone like Miss Velena. But detectives still had questions, especially about the footprint found at the crime scene. While combing through Quenisha's apartment, they came across a pair of boots. The tread pattern looked a lot like the one left behind at the crime scene, and there was something on them that looked like blood.
What size shoe you wear?
I was so wrong.
I'm just asking.
These are 12 minutes.
All right. Do you have any boots up in your apartment?
Those are mine.
Those are yours?
Yeah.
The boots were sent to the lab to check for blood evidence. Quenisha lived just a few floors down from Miss Velena, so investigators needed to confirm whether she was even in the building at the time. But things started to shift when detectives took a closer look at her phone, and what they found raised new questions about her story.
During our interview, she allowed us to look at her cell phone and look at text messages and phone calls. It established that she attempted to contact the victim on Saturday, January 4th, several times.
We also could see that Quenisha Anderson was attempting to get a hold of Lee Williams throughout the day.
There were several text messages between Lee and Quenisha, where Quenisha is asking Lee where he is. We sent Quenisha's phone out to the crime lab so that they could extract all data and information from the phone.
Quenisha's phone gave the cops some important clues. When they looked closer, they found lots of calls and messages that didn't quite add up between her, the victim, and Lee Williams. Now, Lee was starting to look suspicious too. Could both of them have been involved? And was it all about the money? The cops were still piecing things together when the life vest report came in. It gave them the exact time of death, which helped narrow down who was in the building around then.
In obtaining the information from the life vest company, we learned that the life vest was still active and working at around 2:50 p.m. And the last data that transmitted over back to the company stopped at 3:03 p.m. We now had a decent time frame narrowed in as a time of death. So it was then time to go back to the surveillance footage and the key card data to find out who was in that building during this time.
Cops checked the apartment records and saw Quenisha's key card had been used at that time. But when they looked at the security footage, it wasn't Quenisha using her card. It was Lee Williams. Around 2 p.m., Lee entered Velena's apartment. Just over an hour later, at 3:03 p.m., investigators would later estimate that to be the time Velena was killed. At 3:13 p.m., Lee exited the apartment. Around the same time, his device reconnected to the Wi-Fi, suggesting he returned to the area immediately after the crime.
We could see Lee Williams moving back and forth quite often. As we observed Lee Williams coming and going throughout that day, he changes clothes numerous times. There's times when he is observed wearing a backpack. All of those movements together in the time frame which he was doing it piqued our interest in Lee Williams.
Just 20 minutes after Lee had exited Velena's apartment, at 3:36 p.m., a second transaction was made using Quenisha's card. It raised more red flags. Then at 4:50 p.m., Lee re-entered the building, but this time he was wearing different clothes. Minutes later, at 4:59 p.m., another transaction occurred on Quenisha's card. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. That made Lee the main person they wanted to talk to next. Investigators knew they couldn't wait any longer. It was time to confront Lee and hear his side of the story.
We understand that you You had met her, right? Spent some time with her at her apartment. She's been to Q's apartment, right?
Yes.
So what we're trying to establish right now is kind of figure out a timeline of when she might have passed. Right. So when's the last time you saw her? When?
Well, the last time I saw her was when me and Q went to her house.
Yeah.
And I think that was Friday or Saturday. Q was trying to get in touch with her to take her to the bank.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because we understand there's probably attempts made to try to get in contact with Miss V on Saturday.
I called her from my phone, and Q called, and I went up there and knocked on the door from time.
The cops weren't just going to take his word for it, just like they did with Quenisha. They checked Lee's phone too, looking through his call logs, messages, and movements that day. And what they found only made things more interesting.
So this was Saturday, was January 4th, right? So there's no phone calls in here for Miss V on Saturday. Is there any reason you would have deleted phone calls on your phone from Miss V?
I don't think I will.
Well, she called you and you called her.
Yeah,
but there's no evidence of that on your phone. You were the last person to see her alive. You ever
That's not necessarily true.
It is true.
When the cops looked through his phone, things didn't match up. There were no calls to or from Verlaine on Saturday like he claimed. So they asked him straight, did he delete anything? Lee denied it, but the data told a different story. When the interview ended, detectives didn't waste time. They took Lee's phone and sent it off to the lab, just like they had with Quenisha's. At this point, both of them were officially suspects. But just as they were piecing things together through the phones, a call came in from the maintenance team. They'd found something in the building's basement trash chute.
During our search of the victim's apartment and during the autopsy, we never located a red purse. Inside of One Lincoln Square, there's a trash chute that's on each floor that goes down to the basement dumpster. Detectives contacted maintenance for the building and asked for access to the trash chute and the dumpster in the basement. As they were sifting through the trash of the dumpster, they located the victim's red purse.
Also observed was men's clothing, a blue hooded sweatshirt and blue denim jeans.
This was similar to the clothing that Lee Williams had on the day Valina Shepard was murdered.
That physical evidence was sent to a crime lab in efforts to obtain DNA from that clothing.
When they sent that clothing to the lab for DNA testing, the cops thought it might just help them connect the dots, but they'd no idea what was coming. The results didn't just move the case forward, they changed everything. By then, data from Lee's phone had arrived, and it backed up what the police had suspected all along.
When I got Quinasia Anderson and Lee Williams' report back, I knew that was a breaking point in this case.
One detail in particular caught the detective's attention.
In analyzing the text message data, we were able to observe a series of texts between the two of them on the day prior to her death, with Lee Williams saying, "I have her keys, just shut the door." That was important to us as we never recovered Valina Shepard's keys to her apartment.
But the texts weren't the only thing they uncovered. What stood out even more was evidence suggesting that Lee might not be as naive as he seemed.
The homicide occurred on January 4th, 2020. When I analyzed Lee Williams' cell phone, I did see that his cell phone was linked to Wi-Fi connection. He was at One Lincoln Square for a duration of time, and then he left that area. I tracked him back in that area at One Lincoln Square, and then he was traveling somewhat northbound in that city area. And then after, he did move throughout the city, and then he returned to that residence.
Police wasted no time reviewing CCTV footage from the area Lee was believed to have traveled through. The clock was ticking, and they still didn't have enough evidence to charge him. But that was about to change.
We were able to cameras that captured Lee Williams walking for several hours from One Lincoln Square all the way around the city of Albany and entering several convenience stores.
CCTV footage from January 4th, 2020 at around 3:26 p.m. showed Lee walking through the area with a backpack. But in later footage, the backpack was gone, and with it, possibly the answers police were looking for.
In watching Lee Williams' movements throughout the day, he can be observed wearing a backpack on his back. That night, Lee Williams returns to One Lincoln Square, and he does not have that backpack on. So we wanted to find out what he was doing with his backpack. And ultimately, where did it end up? Where did it go?
What caught investigators' attention was that at 8:14 p.m., Lee was seen on camera crossing Delaware Avenue at Elm Street while still carrying the backpack. Moments later, in the next frame, it was gone.
Based on this information, we knew that in that city block, he had to discard of that black backpack.
Finding the backpack became a top priority as it might hold the key to ultimately solving the case. Investigators searched everywhere, from garbage cans, alleyways, to even the Albany landfill, but it was nowhere to be found. With no physical evidence to go on, they turned their focus back to the digital trail. It was a move that would prove to be the turning point, and soon you'll see why.
Having access to Lee Williams' cellular telephone, we were able to view certain things within it. One thing that we found was a picture of what appeared to be an engagement ring. In viewing photos that are taken by a cellular device, we were able to view metadata that is contained on that photo. In looking at the metadata contained within the photo of the ring, you could tell the picture was taken at 6:12 p.m. on the day that Valina Shepard was killed.
The picture became even clearer moments later.
In viewing Lee Williams' text message within that phone, there was a correspondence with a phone number that appeared to be Lee Williams trying to sell the ring.
Upon running a background check on the number Lee had been texting, they discovered it belonged to a jewelry dealer. To confirm their suspicions, they asked Valina's son about the ring. The son confirmed it was his mother's and that it had been missing. The investigators went to the jeweler's shop, where CCTV footage from 6:37 p.m. showed Lee attempting to sell the ring. This was a breakthrough that could unlock the motive behind everything.
The video surveillance confirmed that the person who came to his place of business to pawn a ring was Lee Williams.
By further reviewing the CCTV footage, police also uncovered a link between the shoes found in Quenisha's house and the footprints at the crime scene. The prints matched a specific brand, and in the footage, Lee was seen wearing boots made by the same company.
When we reviewed the video surveillance, Lee Williams was wearing black boots on the day the murder had taken place. And we never found the black boots, but we could see they were all made by the same company over the course of several years and had the same tread pattern as this footprint, which was left in the apartment. So we suspected that he had discarded those and that they had been used during the course of the murder.
Everything pointed to one chilling possibility. Lee was trying to pin the crime on his... They questioned Quenisha about the shoes and her card being used to enter the apartment, but she denied any knowledge, further strengthening the theory of a setup. Then came the unexpected. Weeks after the investigation stalled, the missing backpack appeared. An anonymous individual dropped off the same backpack Lee had been carrying. It was the final clue that could crack the case wide open.
It was determined that that bag was the same bag that Lee Williams was walking around with that night. Inside the bag, there was an Echo Dot. There was laptops. And comparing the serial numbers on the devices that were in the bag to the box that was found within Valina Shepard's, you could tell that they were one and the same. Having this backpack was another piece of evidence pointing Lee Williams to this homicide.
With the new evidence, investigators became certain that the motive for the murder was money.
Lee Williams saw Valina Shepard as somebody who was vulnerable. He had seen Valina Shepard counting hundreds of dollars in cash a few days before. I suspect that Lee took money from Valina Shepard's purse. Valina Shepard discovered that, and that was why she hid the money in her underwear. She probably confronted him about the money that she was missing, and Lee Williams made the decision that rather than deal with Valina Shepard or her accusations, he was going to kill her.
Then they received the DNA report confirming that the blood on Lee's clothes belonged to the victim. This was the final piece of confirmation they needed. Lee's barbaric act stole the life of a woman who was deeply loved. Her loved ones were left to endure unimaginable trauma.
Valina was like a second grandmother to my children. We were really close. It's hard because she was so strong. It was the worst thing to hear. And still, how could you do this to somebody? How could you do this to an older woman that was sick and was walking with a walker? I just couldn't understand it.
Valina's family was holding on to hope that she would finally receive the justice she deserved and the respect that was denied to her in death.
Nobody really could believe what happened. We came back up to Albany, and we all had shirts, Justice for Valina, and we released the balloons in front of our building to, give a little bit of closure of what happened to her.
We just wanted to show that we were here and we were still fighting for justice and that we weren't going to let this go without a fight.
Often I describe the victims of homicides as being voiceless, and I have to be their voice.
Her family will always live through the memories of her, holding on to the love she gave them.
He destroyed her family. He took a grandmother, he took my sister, he took an aunt. It's like, we'll never be the same again because Valina's gone.
With all the evidence in place, they were ready to arrest him and move forward with the trial.
You have a long history of lying. You lied on videotape to the police numerous times. Hold on, I'm speaking now, you're done. Do not interrupt me. You brutally bludgeoned to death an elderly woman, disabled, sweet, and innocent, in an attempt to get her life. You are a monster, and you should never be allowed out of the correctional facility.
Lee Williams was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम दोस्तों, उम्मीद करता हूँ आप लोग खैरियत से होंगे और मज़े से बैठे होंगे। अच्छा, ये मुझे बताइए कि आप मेरी वीडियो आपको कैसी लगी जो मैंने अभी पोस्ट की है। इसके बारे में मुझे कमेंट्स करके ज़रूर बताया करें और कमेंट ज़रूर किया करें और अपनी बारे में भी इंफॉर्मेशन दिया करें। तो ज़रूरी होता है कि कमेंट्स से आपका पता लगता रहता है कि मैं कैसी वीडियो बना रहा हूँ, कैसा वो कर रहा हूँ। ये क्राइम स्टोरीज़ हैं, तो इसके मुख्तलिफ़ क्राइम स्टोरीज़ मैं कवर करता रहता हूँ। तो ये क्राइम स्टोरीज़ हैं, क्राइम स्टोरी के बारे में मैं कर रहा हूँ कवर। तो इसके मुतालिक आप ज़रूर मुझे मैसेज किया करें, कमेंट्स किया करें और वीडियो को पूरा देखा करें। वीडियो पूरे देखेंगे तो फिर बात बनेगी, आपको पता लगेगा कैसे क्राइम्स होते हैं। तो ये सारी क्राइम स्टोरीज़ देख लें, मैं कवर कर रहा हूँ इसको। तो मुझे ज़रूर कमेंट्स करके बताइएगा और अपने बारे में भी बताएं कि आपके क्या हाल हैं और क्या हो रहा है और कैसा चल रहा है आपका ज़िंदगी, लाइफ कैसा चल रहा है और ज़िंदगी कैसी गुजर रही है, लाइफ कैसी जा रही है। तो इसके बारे में भी मुझे कमेंट्स करते रहा करें। और ये है कि मैं अभी बस ऐसे ही बैठा हुआ था, मैंने कहा चलें कोई ऐसी वीडियो बना दूँ। तो बस बैठे बैठे यही चल रहा है, वीडियो बन रही है और वीडियो बना रहा हूँ और चल रहा है सेटअप। बस यही सेटअप चलता रहे, बंदा आगे बढ़ता है यार, इसी से आगे बढ़ता है। वीडियो बन रही है, बंदा इसी से आगे मूव करता है और मूव करना चाहिए बंदे को। आगे बढ़ना बहुत हर किसी के लिए बहुत ज़रूरी है और आगे मूव करते रहना चाहिए बंदे को। ज़िंदगी इसी का नाम है और ज़िंदगी गुजारने के लिए हर किसी को आगे मूव करना बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है। और भाई यार, अपने बारे में कुछ बताया करें कि आप क्या कर रहे हैं, क्या नहीं कर रहे हैं। लाइफ के बारे में कुछ शेयर किया करें, लाइफ के बारे में क्या कर रहे हैं, क्या नहीं कर रहे हैं। तो इसके बारे में भी शेयर किया करें, अपने बारे में भी कुछ बताया करें क्या कर रहे हैं और अपने बारे में शेयर किया करें। दोस्तों की बातों को भी शेयर किया करें और क्या हो रहा है, क्या ज़िंदगी गुजर रही है, तो ये ज़रूर बताया करें और सुनाएं। और आपकी ज़िंदगी इसके अलावा कैसी गुजर रही है, कैसे चल रहा है लाइफ का सारा वो बैकग्राउंड क्या है, क्या नहीं है, तो ज़रूर बताया करें। और दोस्तों, इसके अलावा और क्या हो रहा है और क्या चल रहा है, तो ये इसके बारे में भी थोड़ा गाइड किया करें। ये है कि अपना वो दिया करें अपने बारे में कि क्या हो रहा है, क्या चल रहा है, इसके बारे में मुझे ज़रूर बताएं और कंफर्म करें। तो बस ये है कि मैं ऐसे ही बैठा हुआ हूँ, मैंने कहा चलें आप लोगों से बात कर ली जाए और मैं आप लोगों से बात कर रहा हूँ और बैठा हुआ बातचीत कर रहा हूँ, बातचीत हो रही है आप लोगों से। तो बस इसके अलावा हम वीडियो ख़त्म करते हैं। ओके।